Welcome to Stand By, Lights, Camera, Action. I'm Leonard Nimoy, and this is a sound stage where movies are made. What we do is take you behind the scenes so you can see exactly how movies are made. Today's show is extra special to me. You're going to see how we filmed Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. You'll get a chance to join me as we visit the Paramount lot on a behind-the-scenes look at Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. You'll also see some Klingons as you've never seen them before. George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, the Academy Award-winning creators of Raiders of the Lost Ark, reunite for Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. In this action and peril-packed adventure, the title role of the daredevil archaeologist Indiana Jones is recreated by Harrison Ford. Talk about recreating a role. In a little while, we'll be doing just that with my special guest, George Takei, who plays the part of Commander Hikaru Sulu, helmsman of the Starship Enterprise. You'll also meet Starlog editor Howard Zimmerman, and from Paramount Pictures, the Star Trek publicist Eddie Egan. We'll look into the genesis of the Star Trek phenomenon that has spread worldwide. But first, a behind-the-scenes look at the filming of Star Trek III, The Search for Spock.
All that they've loved, all that they've fought for, all that they've stood for will now be put to the test. Star Trek III, The Search for Spock.
The word, sir? The word is no. I am therefore going anyway.
You do this, you'll never sit in the captain's chair again.
Engage all the systems. Clear all moorings. Cleared, sir.
1/4 impulse power. Someone is stealing the Enterprise.
Warp speed.
Klingon bird appraiser. She's arming torpedoes.
Shields up.
The shield's non-responsive.
We're a sitting duck.
Join us on this, the final voyage of the Starship Enterprise. Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. The adventure continues.
Here on the world-famous Paramount lot, Star Trek the movie began. A cast and crew is once again assembling, this time to bring to the screen the long-awaited Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. Star Trek III is the most exciting and spectacular of the Star Trek series. Leonard Nimoy, host of Stand By, Lights, Camera, Action, was chosen to direct this epic film. 7 of Paramount's sound stages were used. 3 were needed just for the planet Genesis, the world created in the Wrath of Khan. In The Search for Spock, Genesis goes through 3 stages of self-destruction.
These are some sketches done on photographs of the largest set that we've constructed for the picture. It's part of the Genesis planet, and this is a combination of photography and sketching that shows the condition that the set is in when we first arrive at it. And then as the planet begins to deteriorate, we take off some of the foliage and start turning the colors a little bit different, as you can see here, so it starts to get a semi-dead look. And then in its final stage here, the last night sequence that we shoot on the set, everything is almost completely dead, and the planet is in pretty bad shape by this time and is about to destroy itself. Because, as you remember in the story, it was created by an imperfect Genesis device, which never should have been set off. It was set off by accident or unintentionally by Khan in an effort to kill all the people on the Enterprise. This set is part of our Genesis planet. It was constructed on one of the largest sound stages in Hollywood in the motion picture industry. And it is a set that you'll see various times in Star Trek III because it goes through various changes. The first time we see it, it's looking pretty good. There's quite a bit of foliage on the trees, and it has a fairly healthy look. Gradually, through the course of the picture, the set decorators and the art director change the look of the place by cutting down on the amount of greenery that you'll see, and little by little it starts to turn brown and more dead looking, which is the idea, because as you'll find out in Star Trek III, the Genesis planet is gradually disintegrating.
With the set externals completed and the special effects team ready to go, cinematographer Charles Correll and his crew set up the first shot on the planet Genesis.
John, take this around here.
Reunited for the Enterprise's last excursion are William Shatner as Admiral Kirk, DeForest Kelley as Bones, and the rest of the Star Trek crew, and of course Leonard. This time, however, Leonard's station is behind the camera, where he made his debut as a feature film director.
Monday night to do the first changeover.
Huge wind machines were employed on these stages, along with a variety of exotic plants, to create the unstable planet at the heart of this adventure. Here, some members of the crew test the effectiveness of the wind machine, making sure it creates the desert effect needed to depict the beginning of the violent geographical upheaval on Genesis. Meanwhile, two Klingons rehearse their alien dialogue, created by Mark Okrand, who also devised all the alien languages heard in Wrath of Khan.
What was that last line you just did? Oh, no.
That isn't the line?
That's not it.
That's the one we rehearsed yesterday.
It's the lead-in to the next scene.
Oh, the interior of Lucy's bedroom.
That's it.
Okay, we got it, okay.
Don't pay attention to anything these guys say.
With all the effects synchronized and Director Nimoy ready to begin, Warlord Klingon Christopher Lloyd and his evil troops set foot on this turbulent planet.
All right, quiet, please. We're standing by. You all right, Joe?
Bring that up.
All right, quiet. Camera's rolling. Speed.
Bring it up a little bit.
Mark.
Wait, halfway.
Help out. Okay, upward effects.
Go.
Because of all the dust and wind blowing up in this scene, this Panavision camera had to be thoroughly cleaned after each take so as to ensure the precision and clarity of each shot. As an added precaution, all technicians on hand were instructed to wear surgical masks to prevent the inhalation of any chemical compounds or dust. Under the art direction of John Chilberg, these crew members prepare Spock's coffin, or tube as it's called in the movie, for its long-awaited discovery. The microbes which are being placed around the tube are in their primary stages of development and are a result of the Genesis effect. You may not recognize this worm-like creature, but believe it or not, it is the same microbe we just saw. In its final stage of development, and with the aid of nylon strings and a puppeteer, this creature will come to life, assuming the motions of and threatening danger like that of a deadly snake. Let's watch as Leonard, cast and crew do a take of Warlord Klingon Krug meets the microbe.
Yeah. Okay, now start squeezing, Chris.
It's the microbe.
Yeah. Now. Okay, now start squeezing, Chris. Squeezing more. Good. More. And it's dying, and it's dead. Let it die. That's it. Take it off, Chris. Great. Got it. All right. Very good.
And now let's see how this scene appears in the movie. How did Star Trek III evolve? Producer-writer Harv Bennett comments.
What happened was that in Star Trek II, we in effect improvised a cliffhanger. We didn't really start out to do that, but that's how it ended up. And therefore Star Trek III, for me, has been and will be a companion piece to Star Trek II. It is, if you will, a 2-volume set. I think that we owed our audience an explanation. I think we also owed them what the title implies, A Search for Spock.
On September 8th, 1966, a new era in television was launched with the premiere of a weekly science fiction series, Star Trek. Please welcome an important member of the original Star Trek family, the fine actor who plays Commander Sulu, George Takei. George, welcome to the show.
Good to be here with you, Leonard.
Thank you. You know, we've worked together as actor and actor, now as host and guest, and in Star Trek III, we worked together as director and actor. How did you feel about that?
Well, I got to tell you, with you in that director and me in that actor position, it was different from that actor and actor relationship.
How so? How did you feel?
There was some apprehension, to be honest with you.
Why?
Well, you know, actor-actor relationship, you know, your colleagues, your peers. Mm-hmm. Now, in that director-actor relationship, you decided who got the close-ups, whose scenes were cut out. Mm-hmm. You were in the director's seat. You were in the operative decision-making seat. And so I had to compete with my colleagues for your attention, you know. So there was that kind of skittishness. But, however, I gotta add that once we got into the flow of the thing, it was a whole totally different situation. Because our pre-established actor-actor relationship, an actor-friend relationship, if you were, that helped tremendously. Mm-hmm. We were able to talk in shorthand. Mm-hmm. There was no long, you know, discussion. All I needed was a raised eyebrow, and I knew what you were trying to say to me. So that, you know, there was a whole different relationship there altogether. Also, I think what you did was, you came certainly very well prepared, and that gave us a great deal of confidence. But I found that with other directors that come well prepared, they have a certain vision, they know what they want, and that's what they're going to get. You were prepared, and you knew what you wanted, but you allowed us to bring our creative thoughts with you, and you really opened your mind and listened, and when they were good, you incorporated them. And so we made your work better. Right?
Keep going, George. You're doing great.
Well, the reason I'm doing all this is I want to be in Star Trek 4, boss.
You got the job, George.
What about Star Trek 5 now?
That one, too. That one, too, I promise. What does Star Trek mean to you? What is the philosophy of Star Trek for you?
You know, Star Trek is a show that I'm personally proud, as I know you are, to be associated, because it was more than just a good action-adventure show, which that was. And that's certainly something to be proud of. But beyond that, Star Trek, I think, communicated a philosophy and a vision of who we are and what kind of people we are. The Enterprise is a metaphor for the planet Earth. The Enterprise is populated by people that look like you, that look like me, like Uhura. And certainly we were specific human beings, but we also were symbolic human beings. And we talked about the importance of our each contributing our uniqueness to that larger good. Right. And if we didn't, then the well-being of all of us was in some way jeopardized. We talked about the interdependence of all of us. And symbolically, we represented that kind of interdependence that we share on a global basis. I think the fact that Star Trek also had this very important subtext of commentary on the human condition was an important one, particularly in the 1960s when the country was literally being torn asunder by burning issues, the civil rights crisis, the Vietnam War, our involvement in a war that a large segment of the community, of the nation did not support, the generational gap exacerbated by the drug culture. When television, this potent, powerful medium, was being accused of being the vast wasteland, we were, I think, that sole solitary glimmering light that dealt with the specifics.
So Star Trek really says then, to sum up, that it is possible for people of diverse backgrounds and cultures to work together successfully.
Absolutely essential, and we're feeling that even more keenly today.
Very valid idea. Why don't we take a look at the 23rd century, George? Will you introduce this scene for us?
Ah, yes, Star Trek 3. Well, McCoy is acting a little bizarre, and because of that, he's been incarcerated. Kirk and Sulu feel that it's important that we get him out, and so we come to rescue Dr. McCoy.
Okay, here's Sulu flipping out.
Where's Admiral Kirk?
He's with the prisoner.
Get him quickly. Commander Starfleet wants him right away. Keeping you busy?
Don't get smart, Tiny.
Admiral, Starfleet's
Commander sick. Here, take a look. Side elevator. Agents on their way up.
Don't call me Tiny.
If you could change places with any one of the cast members, who would you choose?
Well, I don't know whether I can comfortably say this in front of you, but...
Say anything you want.
Well, I still want to do Star Trek 4, you know.
Okay, you got it.
In that context, Sulu really has prepared his whole career with Starfleet and planned it and patterned it after Admiral Kirk, when he was Captain Kirk. He was his role model, and his, of course, goal is to achieve his command, the captaincy of his own ship. But then that's not the be-all and end-all, because his hero is still going on to higher and greater achievements as an admiral. And so I think Sulu's hero in the Star Trek context, Starfleet context, is Admiral Kirk.
So you'd like to sit in the captain's chair?
In the captain's chair.
Yeah.
Aye, sir. Aye, sir. Aye, boss.
Millions of people around the world watch Star Trek, talk Star Trek, think Star Trek. When you go out in public to talk to Star Trek fans or Star Trek audiences, what are the questions they ask you most?
Well, it varies with the generation, but the large young fan following, I guess, are most interested in one, what my favorite episodes might be, and two, what I enjoy eating.
Oh, really? What do you tell them?
I love chocolate chip cookies, and I get boxes of chocolate chip cookies.
Sulu is a chocolate chip cookie nut.
I am a chocoholic. Now, people know that I'm a runner, but I
get
run.
Boxes and boxes of chocolate cookies now, you know
Chocolate
that.
chip cookies.
That's great.
I already get them.
And when they cookies now, you know
Chocolate
that.
chip cookies.
That's great.
I already get them.
And when they ask you what your favorite episode is, what do you tell them?
Naked Time.
Tell us about that.
Got a chance to share an aspect of Sulu that we hadn't had to until that episode. Sulu is a swashbuckler. He is someone who fancies himself, and of course in that episode, this disease that controlled our minds destroyed all inhibition, and we behaved in the way that our fantasy dreams
I remember it well.
behave,
Yeah,
and I went wild with it.
Out came the sword.
For it.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
I grew up as an Errol Flynn fan as a
Oh, did
kid.
you really?
Had my mother make me a Robin Hood outfit, organize the neighborhood kids in my merry band, and Naked Time gave me that opportunity to relive that as an adult.
To be Errol Flynn for once.
Errol
Flynn. You know, we went through a very interesting experience with Star Trek. It was on the air for 3 seasons in the 60s, and then was finished. It was canceled at the end of 3 seasons, and I expected, I imagine you did, I'd like to get your thoughts on it, that maybe a year or two of reruns and the show would disappear. Then a resurgence started. Hundreds and hundreds of television stations started to pick up the show in syndication. Worldwide fan organizations, 450 clubs I've heard, and 600 fan publications, 75 books. How did you feel about that? Were you surprised about the resurgence?
Incredible phenomenon. Yes, it was surprising, because like you, I thought there'd be a few reruns with attendant residuals,
and it would go away.
Yeah. Then the convention started, a phenomenon, you know. And as a matter of fact, I just came from a convention in St. Louis. Great success. 1,800, 2,000 people from all over, not just this country, but from Australia and from Germany as well. This phenomenon, this audience reaction, I think, is one of the most gratifying things, this dedication, this loyalty, this almost fanaticism to Star Trek. But I'd like to think that it's also because they recognize the basic philosophy that we talked about.
And you think that's the strength of the show, and that's what keeps it going?
Here we were in a little village called Hollywood doing that, and we've been able to communicate that to this global village as well. So in that respect, it's science fiction in the 20th century, communicating to people in Australia, in Germany, in Japan, on a global basis.
You're talking to them now, millions of people all over this globe. What is there you would like to say to them?
Their loyalty, their dedication, their appreciation for Star Trek is what made the return of Star Trek and all these guys as possible. And I'd like to think of this world event that's happening in Los Angeles this summer, the Olympics, and our participation in it as symbolic of that. Paramount bought me a kilometer in the Olympic torch run, this eternal flame that burns in Olympia, Greece, being carried across the United States, from New York to Los Angeles by thousands of runners. And Paramount bought 5 kilometers, and we've been able to share 4 of those with Star Trek runners in Washington, in Chicago, and in Annapolis, St. Louis.
That's wonderful.
And then the last kilometer in Los Angeles for me. This symbolically kind of ties all of us together like that. And for that kind of loyalty and faith and support and enjoyment of Star Trek, I want to say to all these phenomenal fans, thank you.
Well said, George, well said. I want to express my appreciation to you for being here, for being the fine actor that you are, the good friend that you are. I'm grateful that you came on the show to talk Star Trek with us, George. Thank you very much.
Always good.
See you soon. Thank you. The film, Splash.
Stand by. Lights, camera, action.
Starlog is the most read science fiction media magazine in the world. In keeping with today's Star Trek theme, I'd like you to meet the editor of Starlog, Howard Zimmerman. Howard is also a contributing editor of Star Trek III magazine. With us, too, is Eddie Egan, Paramount Pictures senior publicist on Star Trek III. Eddie, how have you seen Star Trek evolve?
Well, of course, Star Trek began as a television series. It was on the networks for 3 years. Not terribly successful during its initial run, but in fact, it was canceled twice, as I know you're well aware.
Yes.
But there was a grassroots fan movement at the end of the first year and again at the end of the second year that started a letter writing campaign, and NBC was convinced to bring it back, to ultimately no avail, and it met its untimely demise at the end of 1969.
At the end of the 3rd season, right.
Yeah. So everyone thought that was the end of Star Trek, and then in the early 70s, Paramount put the 79 episodes in syndication, independent stations all across the country, and an amazing thing happened. It became incredibly popular, and all these fan clubs sprung up, and letters started pouring into Paramount to bring it back, and ultimately, in 1979, Paramount released Star Trek the Motion Picture, the first of the 3 films.
What do you feel was the fan reaction to the first Star Trek motion picture?
Well, it was very mixed, primarily because it deviated somewhat from what made Star Trek successful on television. It didn't go into the interpersonal relationships with the characters as much as the series did. And nevertheless, it was a huge financial success, and even the people who didn't like it went to see it 3 or 4 times so they could discuss in great detail what they did not like.
The moral of the story is don't make a great movie?
Something like that.
No, it's just that the Star Trek fans are really something. It's what George Takei said. The Star Trek phenomenon exists because of the phenomenal Star Trek fans. Sure. Howard, I have a question to ask you. Some time ago, I was quoted in an interview someplace in print as using the word sci-fi. I don't use that term. I say science fiction, but the editor evidently, for space or whatever, condensed it in my statement in a quote. And it seemed as though I had said something about sci-fi. I got the most angry mail from people who said, you don't even know what science fiction is all about. If you call it sci-fi and you're an actor in science fiction films, you shouldn't be talking that way. Why do they have such strong reactions?
There is a tendency to overreact, and it's built basically on a feeling of insularity on the part of Trek fans and science fiction fans. Inside the group, we use those terms, but when those terms are used by people who are not into science fiction or into Star Trek, they're used as a throwaway, they're derogatory.
You mean like Trekkies, that kind of thing?
Trekkies, yes. Initially, Trek fans were thrilled to call themselves Trekkies, and banners and fan clubs, Trekkie this, Trekkie that. And it was picked up by the general press and turned around and used in a derogatory way, so much so that Trekkies stopped calling themselves Trekkies and decided they were Trekkers. Right. And indeed, that's the way it breaks down. If you hear people talking about Trekkers, you know they're fans, and if you hear people talking about Trekkies, they're on the outside looking in.
I see.
It's the same situation with the term science fiction.
But science fiction has really come a long way as far as public acceptance is concerned.
Oh, enormous. There's always been science fiction. Before there was science, there were people gazing at the stars and creating mythology about incredible beings who live there and control their lives. The 1700s was filled with science fiction writing. The 1800s had Jules Verne and H.G. Wells. Science fiction has always been around, probably more widely accepted today, because many of those early visions have come to fruition.
Because we've been on the moon, for example.
We have been on the moon, exactly.
Right.
And that certainly was an impetus in getting people involved in the Star Trek TV series all over again. That happened after the show went off the air.
Right.
And
suddenly all these ideas that they've been watching on science fiction shows started to come into a new kind of focus.
Absolutely.
Because we did have a ship that could make it all the way to the moon. Seems to me that one of the main ingredients that's attracted the loyalty of so many of our fans is the family of characters in Star Trek and the relationship, the chemistry of this group of people of various colors, various races, various backgrounds, and the audience seems very attracted by the trust that these characters have for each other. And how supportive these characters are of each other. Do you feel that in the fan feedback that you get, Eddie?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that probably is the core of the appeal of Star Trek. Although it's science fiction and it's out, in the 23rd century, it is the triangle, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, and the other Uhura, Chekhov, Sulu, and Scott. Yeah, they're all working together to solve problems in an unnatural setting. But that's what makes it so popular.
Let's talk about problems. We've gone through some together during the making. We've gone through some together. During the making of Star Trek, we had intense fan and press interest in trying to find out the answers to some of the questions that were posed by the picture. For example, will Spock come back? And would Leonard Nimoy be in the picture and all that kind of thing? We had to go to great lengths to protect our scripts, using false scripts in some cases, coding each script so that if anybody let it get out of their hands, we would know who did it, that kind of thing. You must have gone through similar procedures at Paramount in dealing with the press and fans. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, we try to release as little of the plot as possible, and you try to, draw for the press an interesting picture in other ways, the casting of people like Dame Judith Anderson and so forth. But the major problem with Star Trek films when they're awaiting release is that the public is intensely interested in the smallest details, the size of one ship as compared to another. Are the uniforms different? Does Spock come back? And they're always, to answer those questions, that hopefully they're not outright lies.
You mean you have to try to fool them?
A little bit, yeah. But make it interesting.
Yeah, I guess the point really is to protect the picture for the sake of the fans.
Sure.
So that when they go see it, they see something fresh rather than something that they all know about and have already been told for months in advance what they're going to see.
There's also a great faction that does not want to hear what the story is. They just want to know details.
I'm that way. If I'm at a party and somebody's talking about a movie that I'm going to see, I don't want to hear the plot. I want to say, hey, don't tell me about it. I'm going to see it.
Well, I have that problem, too. Unfortunately, I have to work around it because by the time...
Because your readers are saying, tell us.
Well, by the time we're telling them, I've known for 4 months, and that's part of the problem in working with Eddie in the studio. You're definitely working under a curtain of secrecy, and you want to protect, and yet the press, my lead time is anywhere from 3 to 4 months, and I must have the information then so I can get the issue on sale after the
picture
movie
opens.
Exactly.
Right.
And so there's a great deal of trust and give and take between the magazine and the studio.
Do you think the Star Trek films have lived up to the original philosophy of the series?
Yes, I do. I'm very excited, in fact, about the third movie because it really brings home just what the philosophy was. Star Trek was kind of an aberration in science fiction. Science fiction was popularized in the 20s based on the formula of the 3 R's. ray guns, robots, and rocket ships. And although those elements do have their place in both the Star Trek TV series and the movies, that's not the focus. The films focus on people. They focus on what living in this futuristic environment will do to a person and to interpersonal relationships, how one lives through the future as opposed to how one builds the future. And this was very much a core of the TV series. And as Eddie and you have said, it's the family of characters and what happens to them, how they relate to not only each other but to the aliens they meet, and that is, the aliens they're not at war with. For the most part, when the characters beam down to a planet, they do not go in full military garb. They are there to investigate, and they are there to seek out new life forms and bring them into the galactic family.
Right. Well, for me, Star Trek 3 was really kind of a, referring to the family, it was a picture about that family and their friendship and loyalty to each other. A story that had to be dealt with because of what happened at the end of Star Trek 2, obviously. But I'm inclined to agree with you. I think it's the humanity of Star Trek that sets us apart and gives us our own special space.
And the way it was done, the fans love it. I've been reading mail, stacks of mail, ever since the movie opened, and they are thrilled, Leonard. Every single line that all the continuing characters have in the movie were going over by the kids. Is it in character? Does it show growth? How does it help the interaction? And I'm not talking about college students, I mean the little ones too. They are into it on every line.
That's great.
And they love the way each character gets his or her shot.
Great. Eddie, if people have not seen the previous Star Trek movies, how do you feel Star Trek 3 stands as a picture on its own? Can a person walk in off the street not having seen the others and enjoy Star Trek 3, do you think?
Well, I think it's set up pretty well because it, of course, opens with the most important aspect of Star Trek 2, which is continuing the death of Captain Spock. And then there's another element, the Genesis device, which is explained at some length. And so given those two things within the context of the picture, yes. And it's also kind of hard to conceive at this juncture that anyone out there is not vaguely aware of the relationships of who Spock is, what Kirk does, who McCoy is.
There's so much been written and talked about, and it's been exposed so much.
Motel room anyway, you turn on the TV, Star Trek.
I must say, I have had some very nice mail from people who, and conversations with people who say, I was never a Star Trek fan before, and I never really saw what my friends saw on the show, but I saw this picture and enjoyed it, which is very, very rewarding. Working for Paramount, Eddie, a big part of your job is dealing with our audience. And Howard, as editor of Starlog, you're always listening to the fans. In both cases, your work shows that you care. We appreciate that very much. On behalf of the Star Trek family, I want to thank you both for being with us here today on Standby Lights, Camera, Action.
Thank you.
Leonard, live long and prosper.
Oh, and the same to you. That's very good. You do that well. Can you do it with the left hand? Look at this. He's ambidextrous. That's great.
Okay.
Thanks for being with us.
Standby Lights, Camera, Action will return after these messages.